Hare Krishna. We welcome everyone to this program, the International Books Are the Basis program, which is organized by the ISKCON Ministry of Education. In today's session, we have three leaders from the Australasian Yatra, Ramai Swami and Aniruddha Prabhu and Krishnendu Prabhu. I'd like to welcome our leaders and briefly introduce them. His Holiness Ramai Swami is the chairman of the GBC and a leader in the Australian Yatra since Srila Prabhupada's time. Welcome, Ramai Swami. Hare Krishna. And Aniruddha Prabhu.
Just in regard to that, I'm not the chairman now. I was the chairman up until March, but now it's Bhakti Chaitanya Maharaj is the chairman.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. And Ramai Maharaj served as the chairman of the GBC last year, and Aniruddha Prabhu, a leader in Australasian Yatra for many, many decades, and also the president of the Melbourne Mahaprabhu Mandir, which is an example for all of ISKCON of developed a very wonderful systematic Shastric study program in Melbourne Mahaprabhu Mandir. And Krishnendu Prabhu from New Zealand, he's a leader in the Yatra and specifically focused on educational development. So I welcome our leaders and thank you all very much for joining this important program. Ramai Swami, would like to hear your thoughts in general on the importance of reading Srila Prabhupada's books in the life of a devotee.
Well, it's very, very important, and Srila Prabhupada very much emphasized and repeated it almost daily, wherever he was traveling, in his writings, in his books, in letters. So just like, I remember many years ago, Satsvarup Maharaj put together, I think, some sort of Vedic reader, and he quoted letters that Prabhupada had sent to him. Even Prabhupada, in one letter, I've just got some excerpts. My book should be introduced as regular reading in all the courses at the university, he says. And so he was wanting his books to be read outside of ISKCON devotees. And I'm requesting all my students to read my books very seriously every day without fail. In this way, if your mind becomes absorbed at least 1 or 2 hours daily in the transcendental subject matter of Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, and other books, then very easily you'll make your advancement in Krishna consciousness. And then I'm stressing on this point that all my students should be very much conversant with the philosophy of Krishna consciousness, and that they should read our books very diligently, at least 1 or 2 hours a day, and try to understand the subject matter from varieties of angles. One time, Prabhupada told a godbrother that, he asked him if he's reading his books, and he said, the godbrother said, yes, I'm reading your book, Prabhupada. And then Prabhupada added that, well, unless you read my books, how can you preach? Because this godbrother was a good preacher. And so you have to read my books. And one time when Prabhupada came to Melbourne, the Sankirtan devotees got some special mercy, the book distributors. And we went over to, Prabhupada was staying outside the temple, and we went over to have darshan of Srila Prabhupada. And Madhavisa introduced us. These are all the book distributors, Srila Prabhupada. So Prabhupada, his face lit up and he's had a big smile. And he said, thank you very much for distributing my books. But then he said that, but are you reading my books? And so he emphasized, again, the reading of the books. So that's one thing, distribute the books is wonderful. That's a very wonderful service and very auspicious for those who receive books like Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita. And he made the famous statement, actually, I can't remember, was that particular time or another meeting we were with Prabhupada where maybe that was in a class he did that. But he said that someone asked him, what is the benefit of giving the Bhagavatam to someone? And he said, well, so much benefit. His eyes went big. And so much benefit is there. Even if they touch the Bhagavatam, there's that famous statement that he made that a lot of devotees kind of know. Even if they touch the Bhagavatam, they will get so much benefit. So I remember as book distributors, when we were trying to sell a book, we'd always make sure, even if we didn't sell it, we'd always make sure that we touched the prospective buyer. So then they would get the benefit, just going off what Srila Prabhupada said. So yeah, I mean, you can't stress it enough. You can't. I mean, reading is so important. Prabhupada himself stressed it. Prabhupada himself read the books. You read in Leelamrita and Prabhupada Nectar how he'd have the books read to him. He would sit and listen to Krishna book and to other books. And I remember in my own life, I met the devotees in 1971, but I didn't become a devotee immediately. But when I started to read more, at that time there was only like Back to Godhead and I think Ishopanishad. And I remember the Penguin, little Bhagavad Gita. But when I started to read more, I was actually convinced to actually become a devotee. I guess I was a type of devotee, but to become a full-time devotee, and that happened by reading. And then another, what impelled me more, just after a few weeks of being a devotee, the temple president sent me out on book distribution. So I'd been doing that for a week or two, or maybe 3 weeks, and then I was out in the suburbs, and I was distributing Bhagavad Gitas. And then I approached this one a boy, and I said that this is Bhagavad Gita. I explained to him what the book is, and he said, well, I'm a Christian. I don't believe in those things. And, is that the book of your God, is it? He said words to that effect. Is that the book of your God? He said, yes, this book is the words of Krishna. And he said, where does it say in there that he is God? He was a little bit aggressive and kind of challenging. And so, and then I was a brand new devotee. So and I said, well, yes, definitely Krishna says in here is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And he said, well, you just show me. Just show me where he says it, right? So, being a devotee, I didn't know exactly where it was. I remember reading it somewhere. But then I was opening the book, and he kind of like, in one sense, he got a bit of mercy, because as I was opening and flipping the pages, trying to find the particular verse that, where we know in the 10th chapter, Krishna says that, Samasya Prabhu, that famous verse and those verses there. He was actually looking over my shoulder and reading a few of the verses himself. But then I couldn't find it. And then he said that, and he said, see, you people are so pathetic, he said. You don't even know your own books. You don't even know your own books. You follow some God called Krishna, and you don't even know your own books, where he says he is God. And he kind of walked off in a huff. But then that kind of like stung me. That really kind of stung me. And I thought, oh boy, I better start studying Prabhupada's books. I was really embarrassed. And then from that point, like I was reading, but from that point on, I decided to actually study the books very carefully and learn shlokas and study, and have a set study time. And I remember as a young brahmachari, I would do that just before class. I'd start about 6:45. I'd finish my rounds by then, 6:45. Not rather 6:15, 6:30, and I'd read for at least 40 minutes or 30 minutes in the morning and a little bit at night just before I took rest. So I did that, and I developed a program of learning shlokas. So it helped me immensely, and so it's so beneficial that, and as Prabhupada said to that God brother, how can you preach if you don't read my books? So there's many things to be said about it, but I don't want to monopolize all the time. So it really is very important, and to remain fixed in Krishna consciousness, we have to read Prabhupada's books. We have to read the Shastras. Hare Krishna.
Maharaj, that was a very relevant quote that you shared with us from Srila Prabhupada, where he's recommending or ordering all of his followers to read every day. And also those anecdotes that you shared with us when your experience with Prabhupada, you were the book distributors, and he was particularly concerned about your regular reading, and also that wonderful. It's an amazing story of your street book distribution experience and how that inspired you to regularly read, and you've carried on with that. Let me ask you now, after many years of serving as a leader in ISKCON and as a preacher, what role does regularly reading Srila Prabhupada's books, how does that affect you in your service as a leader and a preacher in ISKCON?
It's essential. I mean, you have, since, especially now, I would read through. I mean, I was traveling around as a brahmachari and traveling around doing preaching programs. And so during the driving, I had buses, and during the driving, I always, I would set like reading the Bhagavatam. Now I'm reading this canto, and then I would read Chaitanya Charitamrita. So luckily, during that, in Australia, there's long distances between towns sometimes, and you get a lot of time to sit. So I would take advantage of that. But then, especially after I took sannyas, which was about 40 years ago, I was giving a lot of classes. So I remember I went a spell for quite some time, more or less morning and night, giving classes, and sometimes during the day. So I had to, if you don't read and refresh, and you just end up repeating the same things over and over. And so to make the classes interesting, you have to read and get different perspectives. And so fortunately for me, Krishna's and Prabhupada have given me a little bit of mercy, that because I have assumed the position of giving classes, and it's a real mercy. So I have to study the Prabhupada's books. There's no way of getting around that. And my memory is not that good that I can remember what I read, from a long time ago. You have to constantly refresh and you go for repetition. Otherwise you just fades off. You have to constantly remind yourself and then learn new things. So for me, I think because of giving classes, and whether they're formal classes in the temple or private classes and for the brahmacharis, or at the temple, or at homes, or courses, seminars, you have to. It's very, very essential to be able to do that and to remain fixed in your own Krishna consciousness. So I think that it definitely gives you a deeper realization by reading. And you read, and then you can speak, and then when you speak, then you get more realization, and you get more realization, then you become enthusiastic to read more, and so you read more. So it's like that. It goes on and feeds into itself. So it's very, very essential just even to remain a devotee and want to speak of spreading Krishna consciousness. And Prabhupada made that clear, emphasizing that point quite regularly.
Thank you very much, Maharaj, for sharing with us your own experience of the importance of reading in helping you maintain your service as a preacher and a leader in ISKCON. Aniruddha Prabhu, Melbourne Mahaprabhu Mandir is exemplary in international ISKCON in terms of development of the systematic Shastric study programs. You mentioned to me a few days ago that we have, I think, 6 or 7 Bhakti Shastri programs going on in Melbourne, and several Bhakti Vaibhav and higher Shastri degree study programs. So what are your thoughts in terms of developing a community, a Vaishnav community, in terms of developing a Vaishnav community? What are your thoughts on that?
Thanks, Atul. It starts with the children, actually. So what we discovered very early in our development, congregational development, was that if we had programs for the children, especially in the Indian community, and we're teaching the children the Shastric basis of, Krishna consciousness, the parents are very keen to see that their children are well educated in these, cultural and spiritual matters. And of course, what we discovered was that the children were then preaching to their parents You shouldn't be eating meat. We should be chanting Hare Krishna. So what we discovered was that parents bring the children for the Shastric education. The children convince the parents that they should come to the temple. And then, of course, when your congregation or your community is expanding, then you've got to train and educate them as well. So we've been very fortunate in having a very enthusiastic community of devotees, especially many coming from India, who are naturally inclined to hearing and studying. It's part of the culture, and we've seen our educational community grow and grow and grow as a response to that offering of transcendental, of spiritual knowledge, and the enthusiasm and the encouragement that people get from, studying Prabhupada's books and gaining transcendental knowledge. So it starts at an early age, actually, studying the scripture. It's not something that only the adults do, but even the children can do it. And actually, it's a family thing, really, in one sense. And so, and especially if you've got an expanding community of devotees, where we used to live in ashram. When Ramayaswamy and I and even Krishnendu, when we joined the Hare Krishna movement, the Hare Krishna movement lived in a temple. And we had the Bhagavad class every morning. We had a Bhagavad Gita. I remember, every Wednesday Balaram used to give a Bhagavad Gita class, and everybody was expected to turn out. All of the devotees had to go to Balaram's Bhagavad Gita class. And of course, there were other Bhagavad Gita classes going on in the evenings as well, which is something that you don't find so much these days in ISKCON. So, it's really critically essential for the development, like Maharaj is saying, for our spiritual nourishment, for our ability to preach, to convince ourselves, right? And especially if we're teaching, you have to have that exposure all of the time. And especially now that our membership is broadly spread, we need to have systematic programs to make sure that there was that famous letter where Prabhupada was explaining to the devotees how we should be boiling down the milk, right? And condensing the quality effectively, not the quantity, but the quality. And in one sense, I see that process of providing systematic education, Bhakti Shastri, Bhakti Vaibhav, Bhakti Vedanta, etc. It's an opportunity to actually build your community. There's the children's programs as well. And so you get a very strong community spirit. One of the devotees came up to me the other day and thanked me, and he said, Aniruddha, we really appreciate the temple because our kids want to come to the temple. The children want to go to the temple. Of course, they want to go to the temple to play with each other, but still, if you're building that environment where the children and the parents are happy to participate, then, and a lot of it's based on Shastric education, then it's kind of like the foundation, the foundation for your community.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for those fascinating description of how you're involving the whole community in Melbourne Mahaprabhu Mandir and inspiring them to regularly read. Krishnendu Prabhu, we'd like to hear your thoughts regarding expanding the movement and the role that individual preachers and devotees regularly reading. What effect does that have on expanding Krishna consciousness? Perhaps you could share also your experiences in New Zealand in that regard also.
Yeah, well, it goes back to what His Holiness Ramaya Maharaj was saying earlier on, that in order to preach, we have to know what's in the books that we're selling. Like Prabhupada also said that these books are not just for selling. You need to read them yourself. And, ultimately, this is a spiritual movement. It's not a movement of professional salespeople. It's a movement of purity and consciousness. The Krishna consciousness movement, not the Krishna sales movement or something, you know. And so it's very important to spread this movement, that we live the values that we're, you know, trying to share. And the way that we do that is by, first of all, understanding those values from Prabhupada's books, and then, you know, doing our best to implement them. But not only learning and applying, but just that the process of reading Prabhupada's books itself is purifying. You know, it's a spiritual sound vibration that just the act of putting our intelligence into the words of Krishna's pure devotee, into Krishna's words in the Bhagavad Gita and so on, it purifies us. And, you know, the famous verse from Chaitanya Charitamrita that Krishna Shakti, my Bengali is not very good, but you know the verse, that without being empowered, it's not possible to spread Krishna consciousness. And so, you know, therefore it's very essential that we spread Krishna consciousness from the inside out, I guess would be the idea. And I think one thing that I'm not sure if you can hear the crying outside. I've got a family of kids, and one of the ways that our movement will spread is through our children, as Aniruddha Prabhu was also saying. And we can see that the religions that are spreading very fast, like particularly the Muslims, is because they have big families. I'm just going to close the window. One second. My wife is taking care of it. I'm not leaving my daughter totally to suffer alone. So, yeah, the point is that it's also very important to spread the movement, that we take the time to really give this Krishna conscious knowledge to our children as well. And part of that process is that, and this comes back also to the importance of reading Prabhupada's books as a preacher, is that when we preach something, as Ramai Maharaj said, it forces us that we also have to study. And so it's the same with, I've found myself recently, we had some online children's classes here in Auckland, and, you know, my kids were supposed to present something. So it meant I had to teach them something to present, and it really made me dive into the books as well. So I think it's definitely a link, that when we have the obligation to share something, it's like a virtuous cycle, that we want to preach, therefore we have to study. And then when we study, we become more empowered to preach more effectively. And just thinking from a point of view of my family, when you have children, it gives you that sense of responsibility too. So I think that looking from that point of view as well, that if we can really look after our children really well, particularly helping them to understand, you know, Prabhupada's books and develop attachment to Prabhupada's books, that is a very powerful way of setting an example and also preaching in a different kind of a way.
Yeah, that's very wonderful. Thank you. Family life, how in family life one can be more encouraged to regularly read Srila Prabhupada's books. That's very wonderful. What do you feel? Let's ask the panel in general. What do you feel are the major challenges that individual devotees face in Australasian Yatra for regularly reading Srila Prabhupada's books?
Are you asking anyone?
Well, anyone can. Yeah. Well, yeah. It's just you can. Maharaj, what are your thoughts on that?
Australasia and my experiences in Indonesia also, I think that, because as Aniruddha said, it's now our movement over the last few decades has become a more congregational-based movement. You know, they've got work commitments, and quite often I stay with the grihastas in their houses, and I just see it, you know. And, you know, they get up early. They got to look after their kids, get the kids ready for school or whatever, and then they go to work. Where they work quite often, and they don't get back till 7 o'clock at night. The kids are there. Maybe they have to take the kids somewhere. You know, you all know better than me. But and so there's just the time. You know, it's just there are many challenges, but this is one that is glaring to me, that just their work commitments, finding the time, especially, with his children. If there's children, and, you're just both husband and wife. But you do get some grihastas who make that extra effort to somehow or other squeeze in some time to read. But I think that's one challenge. And also another challenge I think is that Srila Prabhupada's books are quite philosophical, and it's not light reading. It's not kind of casual reading as such. Say for maybe, but even Krishna book, the Prabhupada, tells the stories, but interwoven there's a lot of philosophy. So, to get devotees to, Bhagavad Gita, to put time aside to go into reading and reading heavy philosophy and so on. That it takes a commitment. It takes a kind of desire, and you have to have a taste to want to do it. I think that's a big part of it too, because if you haven't got a taste, if you haven't been doing it and you've let it go, then the taste isn't there to do it, and it's a real push to do it, and you do it sporadically. But when you start doing it, then you do get a taste. So there are a couple that I can think of just off the top of my head, and I'll leave it to the others to perhaps expand a little bit more on that.
Thank you, Maharaj. Aniruddha Prabhu, your thoughts on the challenges that devotees face?
Whoa. Just the daily grind, as Maharaj said. The routine of a devotee's life is quite intense, and we add on an extra 4 hours of sadhana, I guess, onto what for most people is a very busy day. I don't hear many devotees complain. I know they're working hard. At least in our community. But I noticed that they're all doing their assignments. They're all doing their. I've got a group that I'm teaching, a Bhakti Shastri group that meets regularly every Thursday night to prepare. They prepare together. They do their homework together for the next Saturday's Bhakti Shastri class. And I thought that, I wouldn't have thought of doing that with my friends, but I was quite surprised by the cohesiveness of the group. But I'd say that, as Maharaj says, life is hard, and somehow the devotees manage to, they manage to do it.
Ramaswamy commented that he felt that desire and taste need to be awakened, need to be increased amongst devotees, and then whatever obstacles that we could go on listing so many obstacles, but really if the desire is strong enough and the taste for hearing and regularly reading is strong enough, then we'll find ways to overcome those obstacles individually. So for us as leaders, what are your thoughts? We'll take some contributions from each of you individually, but what are your thoughts on what, as leaders of the yatra, we can do to help devotees increase their desire and their taste for regularly reading? Either, let's say particularly, they may not be, enrolled in a systematic course, because that's a different approach. That there's so much support for there. In terms, but many devotees are not enrolled in courses. So what can we as leaders do to help increase their desire and taste for regularly reading Srila Prabhupada's books? Ramaswamy?
Well, they need association of devotees, and those who are enthusiastic to do that type of thing, because they've got their lifestyle, and they're committed to whatever they need to do to make ends meet. And it's hard to sort of, if they haven't been in the habit of reading Srila Prabhupada's books. And I have to say, I don't know in Australia, I haven't done the maths on it, but apart from Bhakti Briksha groups that hold classes or courses and temples that hold courses, I'm referring to the individual. I know in Indonesia, for example, we ask, when I travel around, I do home programs, and I regularly ask the devotees if they're reading the books and how regularly they're doing, and I go into it a bit. So sort of at the end of the class, I regularly do that. And so, and I've asked other preachers who come through, Kavi Chandra Maharaj, for example, he's my co-GBC there, and they say the same thing. Others who come through that, they kind of regularly ask also, and they find that not only as far as their own individual reading, you don't get a high percentage of devotees who regularly read. And so I go around and I encourage it. I think all leaders should do that, try to encourage it. But after all, it is up to them. And that's why, these where they get together, come to the temple for classes, courses, Bhakti Briksha groups where things are organized. I think that's the kind of one of the, the secrets of success, because traveling preachers, visiting them, doing home programs, that always helps. And they speak about reading Prabhupada's books. That always helps. That should continue on. But I think the secret lies in this group, where you get them together in a group, and they feel they get encouragement from each other, and it's a more of they have to go somewhere. Of course, now with the COVID, they're getting together online, which is very, very good. But sometimes unless they're very had the taste, and I find that especially those who haven't had like a brahmacharini training, as Aniruddha said, that in the early days there were mainly brahmacharini ashrams in the temple. Most of the devotees lived in the temple. There was just a few grihastas around the place, and so we had that training where we attended morning and evening classes. So that was actually the standard in the early days, that everyone would attend the evening class as well as the morning class, and then on the weekend there would be other classes as well. So that training, years spending doing that, instills in you that sort of mood of spending time reading. So, but these days there are not many, at least in the Western countries. Maybe India is a different thing, but in the Western country we don't have so many brahmacharis and brahmacharinis living in the ashrams anymore. It's mainly, as I said, congregation grihastas, and most of them haven't had that training, so they're not in the that mood as the brahmacharis from before. Even though the brahmacharinis have become grihastas, I find that those particular ones still have a good mood for reading Prabhupada's books. So the other ones who have come from outside the ashram and just come as grihastas, many of them. Therefore, I think it's very essential that we organise these group programs, and they, you have to have some sort of formality to it, and you have to make it interesting. Slideshow. Banu Maharaj was with us here at New Govardhan for a long time last year and going in early this year, and he's got so many slideshows on the verses from the Srimad Bhagavatam. I mean, he can more or less, he's developed it over decades. It's just amazing. But he can show practically from every verse of the Bhagavatam, not every verse, but a lot of the verse. He can, he can put a slideshow up to that particular verse and have a number of slides. So you've got to, be flexible, You got to be innovative. You got to make it interesting and exciting. You know, I think getting them together in groups is really been successful, and we should try to increase that as much as possible.
A lot of very practical suggestions there, Maharaj, regularly mentioning it in classes and asking other preachers to also mention that, and arranging groups and making things interesting. And these ways, as a leader, we can help to increase devotees' taste and desire for regularly reading. Krishnendu Prabhu, some thoughts on what as leaders of the yatra, we can do to increase devotees' desire and taste for regularly reading?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, I'd like to appreciate what's happening in Melbourne. You know, Aniruddha Prabhu, you were kind of like, well, what's the problem? Because what you're doing in Melbourne, I think, is something really helpful because you have a systematic program that, you know, everyone's encouraged to participate in. And I think that having these exams and having these systematic training programs gives devotees a goal. Just like many devotees, when they come along, it's like, oh, I want to get initiated. Oh, I've got to chant 16 rounds. And so they have that goal. I'm going to chant 16 rounds and get initiated. And then once you get initiated, it's like, well, okay, what's my next goal? You know, and having these courses provides that, you know, kind of next step or something else to keep the mind focused on. So I think that's a really, really powerful thing. And I know here in Auckland that the devotees that are doing Bhakti Shastri, you know, they're very fixed up and it's really good for them. And so I think it's something that, you know, can be encouraged for everyone. I have a few other ideas as well. One thing that I've started to participate in recently, which I think is something that leaders could encourage devotees to do, is I've got a Bhagavad Gita buddy, and every day we each read one verse from Bhagavad Gita and the purport, and then a 1 minute of our own Bhagavad Gita class, just our thoughts or our reflections on that verse. And we do it on WhatsApp or something similar to that, so that each day we have that accountability that, oh, my buddy is going to know if I don't do my one verse for the day. And then in return, the other person shares their realizations, and, you know, it goes back and forwards like that. And I've been finding it really, really great, because one of the things about developing habits is that if you can keep it really small, it makes it easy to start. Like Maharaj was talking about, developing that taste, it just needs a little bit of a taste in the beginning. Like at the supermarket, you walk around and they go, oh, would you like to try some of this, you know, fried chicken? You know, they give you a little piece of it. Of course, you know, this is the strategy, right? They're offering all these different things, and, you know, you get a little bit of a taste, and you're like, oh, yeah, okay, I'll buy that. So in this way, you know, developing habits with these very small little tastes. You know, once you read one verse, then you're like, oh, wow, that was interesting. Oh, that reminds me of something, and you look something else up. So I think starting really small and encouraging devotees to, you know, do something like what I described is a really good way to help, you know, what do they say? We're all Aussies here, to get off the mark and, you know, get going again. So yeah, they're just a couple of ideas, but also what Maharaj said about the small groups and getting together. Oh, Vaishya Prabhu, he does something I really like. Particularly with the young people, is that he'll have his group, and he'll get each one of the group to give the class each time. You know, so there might be five or six kids, and each time a different student will be giving the class, and then they'll give feedback to each other. So again, when you become a teacher, it forces you to become a learner as well. So just a few thoughts that I've observed. Very practical suggestions. The study buddy and sharing, you know, my reflections on what I read today with your study buddies. Very practical, very encouraging and doable. Aniruddha Prabhu, some suggestions on how we could improve the regular reading of the devotees in the yatra?
I think set a good example is probably one of the most powerful. I remember when I joined the ashram, and I used to see devotees like Ramaswamy and the other senior brahmacharis studying every day. I thought, oh, boy, I've got to get my act together. You know? So I was inspired a lot. In fact, I remember one of my friends, and this might underline the simplicity of the Aussies. You know, I remember going to one of my friends' place, Kunti Boja, in Adelaide, and I went to his house, and in his bedroom he had a Bhagavad Gita, you know, one of those stands. I saw the book and I thought, wow, that looks really spiritual. I wasn't a devotee then. So that inspired me. So I know that the devotees are inspired when their leaders set a good example and are then able to, put that study into practice. They're able to preach. They're able to convince others. They're enthusiastic. They're articulate. They have an example. Like Maharaj was saying, you have to study regularly to be able to respond often at times to the kind of questioning that you get or even the challenges that you get. So setting an example and being a good teacher or a good preacher inspires others, because then devotees are naturally attracted and want to emulate that kind of example. Really, it's very interesting. We've experienced this a few times recently. Our boys are doing a lot of food for life, collecting a lot of boga and then distributing it to the needy of the city of Port Phillip, which is not directly related to book distribution, but it illustrates that a devotees association and some of the stall holders at the South Melbourne market were talking to my wife. She was down buying some flowers, and they were saying, boy, we really love your boys. They're such nice people to be with. They're so happy, right? And my wife came back and said, the people at the market, they just love the boys, right? And it's not because they're preaching or anything. A devotee, we're probably a little too familiar with ourselves sometimes, but we can't underestimate the potency of studying Prabhupada's books, the impact that it has on us, but then the impact that we have on other people when when the devotees associate with them. It's actually quite powerful, and devotees, the people that we associate with, they pick it up. It's like, devotees are radiating bhakti and people can feel it. And that comes from, being a good example and, of course, studying Prabhupada's books, chanting Hare Krishna. It adds up.
Thank you, Boo Boo. As leaders, we can set an example, and that will have a great effect on the general devotee community. I thank you all, our 3 panel participants today, all emblems of Brahminical culture and ISKCON. And we definitely felt that your years of service in the movement reflected in the suggestions that you made today. And from the ministry, I thank you all very much for taking time to participate in this important session. We came up with quite a lot of interesting suggestions to improve the regular reading of Srila Prabhupada's books. From the leader's point of view, speaking about it in classes, encouraging other leaders to speak about it, organize groups, make it more interesting, give challenges, have study buddies, you start small, share some little snippets of realization amongst your group members, and in this way daily encourage each other. Set an example as a leader by regularly reading. We thank you so much for sharing with us today and sharing with us particularly these valuable suggestions for increasing the regular reading of Srila Prabhupada's books. We pray that we can take your association again in the future to further encourage us in this important project of increasing the regular reading of Srila Prabhupada's books throughout the devotees in the movement. Thank you all very much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you very much, Hare Krishna, and thank you to the Ministry of Education. All glories to Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Jai.
Prabhupada.